Welcome to a Unity tutorial. Today we're going to create a scrolling shop menu for our game Pogo Bear. We're going to use this using Unity's ScrollView and dynamic buttons. Right now we have a shop screen but no actual menu. So there's a few key things regarding the formatting of the menu as well as functionality behind the menu. As far as formatting goes, we'll add a vertical layout group to our content object. And this allows us to neatly vertically stack our menu items. We'll add a raw image as kind of the base for our button. We'll center those in the vertical layout group and scale those to size. Now in our content object, if we add a ContentSizeFitter, we can basically add as many of buttons as we want, and our content object will fit to size. So we're adding 5 buttons. And we're just going to tweak the spacing on these with the spacing and the padding variables in order to make sure it's not too crowded. You will need to kind of play around with these as per your own design. So now we're actually scrolling through, and this kind of functionality comes default with the scroll view, but we are going to want to increase the sensitivity. Since this game is for mobile, the sensitivity isn't going to matter because the touch swipe does not use the sensitivity, but for testing with the scroll wheel, it does matter. So now we're going to add a button component to each of these so they can be clicked on. Modify the highlight text just to kind of make it clear that these are buttons and they are selectable. So now we have our buttons in place, and it's time to start adding the interactivity and basically data corresponding to each of our buttons. So we'll create a script called the Shop Manager, and we'll add that to our content game object. I use Vim for my scripting. I find it just loads a little bit faster than Visual Studio, but it comes with some downfalls like having to redo some of the tabbing. So in order to hold the data for our shop, we'll create a struct called shop item with a string for the name or the label and an int for the cost. So we'll know what each item is and how much it costs. We have to add the system.serializable tag in order for these things to be set within the inspector. So when we create a public array of these shop items, and because the shop items are serializable, once this code compiles, we should be able to set these shop items from the inspector like so, setting each label and cost accordingly. This basically associates data, so each button we know what it corresponds to and what it says and how much it costs, and eventually we'll add the actual in-game functionality, all based off of this shop item structure. So once we have the data model, which is our shop item, it's time to think about the view, how this is displayed. So we've created a shop button prefab, which is basically our raw image from before, and we're just going to instantiate that and let the ContentSizeFitter and the vertical layout group take care of all of the formatting for us. So here we're setting the name of the button, and we're setting it to an integer, and this is going to allow us to identify which button was clicked later on. The instantiate method takes a transform as its parameter, so we need to fix that. Okay, so why is this not drawing anything? It's because we forgot to assign the prefab. Okay, so now when we click start, we have buttons, which is the start of something great. Now we need listeners for our buttons. This is basically the section of code that we're going to define as getting executed when a button is clicked. So see how we're passing in the parameter name to the button? This is how we know which button was clicked. And now in another tab, I'm going to pull up the actual syntax for this because it's a little bit funky, but basically it's going to be, we get the button component of our instantiated transform, and we add to its onClick event. We're assigning it to basically execute the on button click, and we'll pass in the name of the button. So now instead of just having our buttons click for show, they actually will start executing some code. And we can see that in the bottom left with the debug messages. So typically, based off the logic here, these should always be integers, the names of our objects, but it's typically a good practice to use the Tripars method, just in case there's any issues. We don't want any game-breaking logic, or at least something that would cause a crash. So the way Tripars works is it takes in the name and it outs an integer, and then using that integer, we should be able to access the label and the cost of that button item, or that shop item rather. And since this is Michael from the future, I know what's going on here. There's a couple errors regarding parentheses, but the int32, I've looked at this. This is not coming standard with your C#. It's not a standard primitive. So we're going to want to change that to int with a lowercase I. And hopefully future Michael remembers this. And so now when we click our buttons, we actually get the data that they correspond to. More than just the name of the button, but the actual shop data, which is the name and cost of that item. Great, so we have buttons and they execute code, but we only know what they are once we see the debug message get printed. We need to have some sort of graphics on the button itself, or else this is going to be a really bland looking shop. So I think in the final game we're going to add images, but for now text is fine. So that we can just set the text and say like this button corresponds to this shop item and it costs X dollars. So since we've modified the prefab to add the text component, we can modify that text component within our start method. For each item, get the child of the button, get the text component of that child, and set the text. And we'll set it to the label and the cost. I've also done some off-screen formatting here to basically get the text to fit. I'm using a filter to make everything kind of potato, really low res, so I have to have really big text. We've reworked the pogo stick model so that we can actually modify the skins. Before I was using cubes and they wouldn't get unwrapped properly, so using Blender we can create our own models, but that's going to be saved for another tutorial, unwrapping and all. So I'm adding a coin manager to our shop manager, so now our shop manager can basically talk to our coin manager. And the coin manager was created previous to this tutorial, but what matters is we're getting a reference to it with find object of type, because I know there's only going to be one of them. And the coin manager has a coins variable with the underscore coins, so that we can basically cross-reference and like know, can you afford this object? So I always like to start small and just debug with baby steps. So all we're doing is saying, can we afford this object? And we're going to implement the buying logic next. Can't afford the banana, but can afford the default. So as far as buying, we want to make sure that we're saving users' purchases, so every time they open the app, it remembers what they own. So to do that, we're going to be reworking this to incorporate player preferences. So player preferences is Unity's way of like saving data like cheaply and quickly. Each player preference is a key value pair. The key is like the name of the variable, and the value is, well, the value. So at the start of playing the game, there are no player preferences. So if the player prefs has key returns false, it means, this is the start, and we don't have that skin yet. But if we do have the key, like as you can see, player prefs set int, that's going to save the key. So if we have enough coins, we'll save it, so we'll know that for the future. We have to call playerprefs.save just to make sure that our preferences are actually saved. And we're creating some test skins here so that we can purchase skins and also equip skins that we've already purchased. So now we're off to the races to gather some coins. This is a little pogo stick based game, so we're just kind of jumping along, gathering coins. So you might be able to see here, we have skins equals find object of type skins manager. So I've created that off camera, and basically that controls the material of our pogo stick. So whatever functionality you want your shop item to execute, we'll still put that in the button click. So if the player preferences has the key, as in we already own the skin, we'll equip it. But if we can afford it, we'll buy it, and then we'll also equip it. So once we go to the shop here and we click our items, we can see that our skins are changing. And our coins are getting decremented. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this helps you create your own shop menus within Unity.